So I bought all the gaskets I need for the car. I actually had these exhaust ones left over that were brand new from the other GT, and I'll reuse the intake manifold gaskets. But anyway, I started by checking out the old oil pickup tube from the GT. This is from the silver GT, the actual one that was in the engine. It was dirty. It had buildup on it from sitting with a blown head gasket with oil and water. And so I decided to clean it out really nice and just make sure that it was ready to go. I even checked out the O-ring to make sure that the O-ring looked nice, and it did. I took it off, I looked it over really well, and it seemed pretty nice. But in the pickup tube, I did notice that there was a tiny little chunk of the timing chain guides, which these are known to break. They're plastic, and the other engine was kind of beat up. It had some broken pieces in it, and so this was in the oil pickup, and I was able to fish it out gently. It's just a plastic piece of the timing chain guides. Now, I actually had two oil pickups to choose from. If you look at the one on the right, it is for a 4-valve, and this is the one I had in my Bullet, and you can see it has this extra little flap here, little shroud, and it has a bigger opening on the bottom for the screen. So that's two of the ways you can tell, and the diameter of the tubing is actually bigger on the 4-valve pickup. I didn't really want to have any oil pressure issues. I've had them in my other 2 valves, so I don't know if it would have mattered, but anyway, I wanted to use the original one that was in the silver GT. So here I'll just clean it out with some carb cleaner, brake cleaner, and I got it all cleaned up. And so now it's time to rotate the engine upside down on the engine stand so I can get the oil pan off and get to those bolts and get to everything that's underneath there. So of course I use my trusty impact that a lot of people make fun of because it's big, but it does a nice job and it gets the job done. So I went around and got these oil pan bolts out, and I had a whole nother set of these from the other car. They are the same for the Crown Vic engine or Grand Marquis engine, whatever. So I collected those and put them in a secure place where I wasn't going to lose any of them. And then next, just gently pry the oil pan off. Now this oil pan is from the Grand Marquis or Crown Vic, and so it cannot be reused for the Mustang. The K-member is in a different area for the suspension. And if you look, the inner side is actually different. It's a box shape with different types of baffles in there. But anyway, this is what the inside of the engine looked like. I've been really excited to see how it looks, and I know the lighting isn't very good in here, but it is really nice looking. Everything looked very clean, no sludge or buildup, just nice clean oil. And the pickup tube is going to have to come up next because it does not transfer over. Now, I did mention that already, that's why I was cleaning it up. But I did inspect the engine, looked in there, made sure everything looked good. Made sure to take my time because you don't have the oil pan off on your car very much. And for me, I'll have it off for a little bit and then I'll have it back on. So I wanted to make sure everything looked good. So the oil pickup tube is different. I did verify that because I was curious to where it was bent different. So here comes the old oil pan gasket, and I did keep it in the right orientation so that I'd know where the new one goes. Although I've done this before, I just wanted to make sure I took it off and put the new one on the same way. So I cleaned the mating surface around the oil pan. It was mostly just a little oily from taking that gasket off. No buildup or anything. And so here is the oil pickup tube bolts. Getting these off, there are two over here and one in the back. With those bolts removed, I just lifted the old one right off, and it wasn't jammed or stuck in there or anything. It just lifted right out. Here's the new one going in. So this again is the GT oil pickup tube, and the O-ring, like I said, I inspected. It looked really nice, so I think everything should be fine there. And I did torque this to spec. Now, unfortunately, the wrecking yard had broken the crank position sensor, and that's okay. I have the one out of the other engine, and I just removed it gently with prying on it. It has an O-ring on it. You can see here. This is the old one. It was only busted off. Maybe they cut off the harness and cut the sensor with it too. So here goes the new one in. They just press in really nice and easy. Like I said, being careful of the O-ring that's on there. And so it slid into place nicely, and then I just took the 8mm bolt, put it back in, got that nice and snug. You don't want to go too tight on these, especially on the timing cover where this is. It's aluminum, so you don't want to strip it. So there's the new sensor. And if you look down in there, you can see that little shaft pointing almost straight up towards the bolt for the pickup tube. Deeper down in there, that is the crank position sensor. It's right there. That's where it goes in. So next I decided to transfer over the oil dipstick tube. Now this is the one for the Mustang, which is in my hand, and it basically just reroutes it so that it comes up around the valve cover a different angle so it's easier to get to, because the engine bay on the Mustang is a little tighter than the Crown Vic. Although I do like the dipstick that's on the Crown Vic better. It's just a nice straight piece instead of the twirly kind that's on the GT, but that's the reason why they're different. Anyway, I wanted to go ahead and take that off and switch it over. I do have this older style on the Crown Vic engine that's in my other car with the straight dipstick, and I did measure to make sure that they come out at the same place in the oil pan, and they do. Now when you take it out, there is a rubber gasket there that holds it in place, and there is also a metal lip, which I decided that I wanted to put some RTV between the gasket and where the metal lip seals, right here where my thumb is, right here. The O-ring should seal fine, but there would also be a little bit in case it gets past that. I just didn't want to have any of that chancing an oil leak. So these can bend and crack, so be very careful and just wiggle them in slowly. And you know, I got mine in there just right, and then I was able to go ahead and bolt it down with the little, I believe it's an 8mm bolt that holds it secure there to the side of the cylinder head. Next thing to compat is the oil filter adapter gasket and oil filter adapter. So this whole piece here is held on by a few bolts. I put this on snug already on the new engine. It is different than the Crown Vic. This is a Mustang one. So this gasket was actually one that I had already used. This came with the other Mustang. And so this is what the gasket looks like, and this is the new gasket from Ford. And I went into the dealership and bought this, and it's actually a metal gasket with the rubber RTV sealant around the openings. And I thought that was a lot different, a lot nicer quality than the plastic ones. These plastic ones are known to crack and leak. I replaced it on my Mach 1, on a couple GTs. And so I like this new gasket. Hopefully it's better quality than the older plastic, but these are both Ford OEM parts here. And I wanted to go ahead and clean the mating surface. And you want to make sure that you check for pitting, because on the aluminum engines like the Mach 1, I had a little bit of pitting around mine, and so I filled it in with some RTV. But cleaning it with a Scotch-Brite very lightly is the way I do it, and making it look nice and clean like this. Something that's really interesting though is there was this little hairline crack here. It's more of a scratch. It didn't go all the way through the housing. It's just on the block there, and I thought that was really interesting that this engine had that. I didn't notice any leaking on that engine when it was on the Crown Vic, but that's how the gasket goes on the adapter housing. And this is how the adapter is going to look inside there. So I went ahead and I smeared some black silicone RTV in that little crack. The black silicone that I use is oil resistant, and it seems to do a very good job. So next comes lining it all up and getting the bolts started. And I noticed with this new gasket, and it might be the same with the old one, but I'm not quite sure, but this new gasket, the bolt actually sort of threads through the top hole, which would be the bottom of the engine, but this is upside down. But anyway, the bolt actually did kind of thread through it a little bit and secured it, so that was something to be careful with. Now, I did snug all these down first, and then I went back with the torque wrench, and I got them at 14 foot-pounds. I've been trying to make sure that I got all the torque specs right on everything here. A lot of these things you can just put in snug, but it's better not to. Now the bottom of the oil filter adapter has this Allen stud, and a lot of people know that these leak on the Mustangs. They're always complaining about it. You can't tell where the oil leak's coming from. And this is what it looks like when you take it out. It's just kind of like a plug, and you can see the orange factory sealant on there. So I cleaned that off, and I put some more of the black Permatex on it, and I cleaned out the hole that it was going to go into to make sure it had a nice clean seal. That's what I like to do. We'll see if that seals perfectly. I would imagine it should. And so putting the RTV in it and then threading it in and putting it in snug. I believe this oil filter adapter gasket housing is also aluminum, so you don't want to go too tight on it, you don't want to strip it, but that should hold very nicely. So this is the oil pressure sensor, and this whole housing was on my SN95 Mustang that had a new edge swap, a new edge PI engine swap, and I did have to swap the old pressure sensor over to the old style that was on the SN95, my 97 GT, and so I wanted to use this cleaner housing on this car, which required me swapping the newer sensor back onto this housing. So the sensor came off the Silver GT, that's the project car that we're working on, and I just had to switch sensors and get this in there nice and snug. It is supposed to have a little bit of a gap between the housing and the hex part of this sensor, so don't go too tight with it, and you don't want to strip things. So always be careful of that. So looking in the engine, this is just kind of a better look. It's very clean in there, timing chains look good, everything I can tell seems nice in here, and I decided I wanted to go ahead and rotate the engine and get that on video and just show what it's like. Now rotating the engine is a little more difficult because I have masking tape over the intake ports, so they're not breathing very well. It's kind of a little bit of a struggle. You could hear it hissing and trying to gasp for air through the taped off ports, but this is just me rotating the engine slowly and making sure that everything looked good, and it did. So the next thing was to clean out the oil pan. Now this is a brand new oil pan. I haven't used it yet. I had it left over. It had some debris in it and stuff, so I cleaned it out really well with the shop vac, and then I went in and cleaned it with brake cleaner and everything, just to get everything spotless, because you never know what's crawled up underneath the oil pan. Now these are the two oil pans together. The other one had the blown head gasket in it, and it was stripped on the bolt to drain the oil out. So I wanted to use the new pan for it, but I did notice this angle is slightly different than the original, and I don't know if that's just a year difference, but everything looked the same besides that, and I wanted to make sure that everything was going to work nicely. Again, the reason I wanted to use the new oil pan was because the bolt was stripped on the drain plug. So there's just the little differences there. So I went ahead and put the old gasket on the engine so that I could put the oil pan on and rotate the engine and make sure that there wasn't any noise, any banging around, or clearance issues, which there shouldn't be, but it's always a good idea to test everything before you put it on. Now something I wanted to be careful about was making sure I had a little dab of RTV, the black oil resistant, on the mating surfaces between the timing cover and the block. So you can see there's a little bit of area there to just lightly put a coat, and I went ahead and did it on the back of the engine too, where the back plate meets the block. I don't know how necessary that is, but just a really light film to get in the crack is all I wanted. I didn't want to compromise the new gasket. So here's the new gasket. I actually had this gasket for years. I bought it in a kit for my Bullet with other things, and I had not used the oil pan gasket, so I wanted to use it on this project. So here's the new oil pan going on with the gasket, and it lined up nicely as it should, and I've had issues in the past with oil pans not sealing right. So I'll torque them to spec. This is me torquing them to spec, just so you know. With the torque wrench, you go in a crisscross pattern. But yeah, with my Bullet, I actually redid the oil pan gasket several times to find out that it was the timing cover that was leaking and not the oil pan. I even bought a deep sump MMR one for it. But anyway, cleaning up the exhaust ports. So this is the engine upside down still, for those who might not be able to see very well. And this is me just cleaning out the exhaust ports and the side of the block too, just getting everything cleaned up a little bit so that I can put the exhaust manifolds on. So I have the Ford gaskets, and I made sure to have them with the Ford logo pointing towards me and upside down, since the engine is upside down technically. And this is a nice treat I like to have while I work on the cars. Just kidding. This is where I keep my hardware for the exhaust. I like saving little bags like that. It's a shame to throw stuff away like that can serve a purpose. So those nice cookies were something that I enjoyed, and then I saved the bag so I could put my hardware in it. So here are the gaskets, and they're kind of hard to put on when there's no studs, because when I took these manifolds off the other engine, it took the studs with it. But anyway, I have stripped exhaust bolts before, the studs, on the first engine that was in my Bullet, and I'll tell you what, it's not fun. It's aluminum, so don't go too tight with it. I did it to the torque specs, I forgot what they were, and I even put a little bit of red Loctite in there because I just don't want those backing out. So that is as far as I got. Now I have a couple more things to do with the new valve covers and the coolant crossover tube and things like that. So I'll get to those in the next video. But here is a little footage of me cleaning up the street. I had some comments of people saying that they didn't like how I had pulled the old engine out in the street. And my wife had actually taken this video of me before any of those comments came. So I thought, I'll just include those in my next video to show that I am a good neighbor and I try to clean up after myself. And it cleaned up pretty well. As a matter of fact, I didn't have any oil in the car when I pulled the engine out of it, and the jack failing is what actually made the biggest mess in the street. And the torque converter did leak a little, even though if you look in the video I had a glove over the end of it to try to keep it from leaking. But I have gone out there and power washed the street. I've put cleaner out there, dish soap, scrubbed it. I've done a lot actually before all the comments came in that I was making a mess out of my neighborhood. But my neighbors are all very nice. They all tell me that I do great work on my cars. They're just really nice people and they don't mind at all. But I do want to clean up after myself and make sure that I'm not making a mess in the neighborhood. So I thought I'd include this footage for those who stayed till the end of the video to see, because yeah, I do try to clean up after myself. But anyway, stay tuned. I have more to go with this engine. I've been cleaning it up a little bit. I have a few more things to do, and then it'll be ready to drop in the car. So stay tuned for more of this build, and I'll put the link in the description to the build of this car, like I try to do at the end of all my videos. I'll put the videos about that specific car in the end of the video in the thumbnail. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, and stay tuned for more of this GT project.